years old and still kind of full of it, but he was such a beautiful rider. He had such a beautiful seat. And that horse walking down the trail, because he'd trimmed him all his life and he'd put the shoes on, and then he had somebody else, and he usually had the cheapest guy come. And the cheapest guy can be great, but he might not be. He might be just learning a whole lot. And that horse, honestly, walked like this in front. I didn't know how it could go down the trail. Rode with him for 3 hours. The horse was perfect. I am sure it's because of years of, excuse me, bad shoeing. And he was fine. He was fine. Some of the event horses I treat, they have to be balanced perfectly. Or it means a rail for somebody. So good shoeing is really important, and we are so fortunate in our valley to have really good shoers here. And so I highly encourage you to, and everybody loves their shoer. That's great. But I myself would pass on the cheaper guy that just came out of school. So you probably know that. But he's got some experience to come along, and it really affects everything from the feet up on a horse, all those muscles. The other thing that really affects them is teeth. You want to really get their teeth floated well, because it can come clear back in those muscles of the head. And of course, signs for that are shaking their head, putting their head up, swishing their tail. You probably got something going on physically with the horse that you're going to want to pay attention to. Have a good fitting saddle. I think this is tremendously important with trail riding. And I have a couple of saddle pads here I want to show you. In your handout, there are a couple of really good sites about a lot of different kinds of pads, and how to pad a swayback horse, how to pad a mutton wither horse. So you might want to take a look at those sites, and then there's a real good study. There's a site there I gave you for a real good study on 4 different pads. One thing, this is just my opinion, because it was on the study, I'd stay away from pads that have air in them. Air varies in our temperature. So what happens to the air when it's cold? What happens to the air when it's hot? So that pad is changing, and that's just my opinion. But I went through the air saddles with Schlese, and I didn't do the pads, but I did the saddle, and I found that the saddle changed all the time. So I caution you about anything with air. I'm not a person that really likes gel pads either, but that comes from the English world, and I think they've improved the gel pads quite a bit. So I think you have to go back to your horse and your saddle. If you can get a reasonably good fitting saddle, one that doesn't bridge or rock, those kinds of things to start out with, you're way ahead of the game. If you have a really good backed horse, then put those wool pads on that are 50 years old. Some of those pads are the best pads in the world. They really are. If you don't have a problem with a horse, you can pad them up, and they're really great. I like felt too. I think it's marvelous. Again, depends on the conformation of the horse's back. My favorite pad, English and Western, and I've had a lot of different experiences with them, is the Saddle Right pad. It's expensive, but the way they have contoured this pad, it will fit almost any horse. See how it is on the wither? So when it lays down on the wither, if you're a high withered horse, it splits apart a little bit more. If you've got a little flatter horse, it comes down like this. Same way in the back. They've started making Western saddles now that are split in the back instead of, sewn up clear to the end. This pad's probably 15 years old. They're guaranteed for life. They're a little heavy, but that's because they have the best shock absorbing I've ever seen in a pad. It does not freeze in the cold. It doesn't get stiff in the cold. And people who have these, I've only had in the 20 years I've been selling these pads because I think they're so great, I've only had one return. And that was a horse that was just different. It just didn't fit that horse well. And so you're going to have some of that. Here's something really quickly I want to show you about pads. These are different padding materials that are used in saddle pads. This is thin line. I do sell thin line. I don't think it breathes very well, so if somebody gets one and they have one with holes in it, I suggest that they put something really breathable underneath it. But what you want to have happen with a pad, this is a very heavy ball, and it stops. There's just no bounce to it. So this material is taking the shock. And it's a great material. In fact, they make shoe liners that are wonderful. This pad is one that's rubber, and it's not very good. I like these pads, but these pads get stiff at 40 degrees. So if you're riding at, and I can show you, if you see them in different magazines, they're open cell pads, lining, and they're great at shock absorbing, but at 40 degrees they get hard, and I don't like that. I actually demoed from a really good company this material, and I really liked it in the heat, and I really didn't like it in the fall. And they weren't very happy with me, but it was true. They needed to go. I don't know what's in this. They don't tell me, but this does not change even in freezing weather. It stays the same, and I like the way it's constructed. There's another new pad out that's made by, and I represent this company too. It's called a Mattis pad, and the English riders ride a lot of versions of it, but this is their Western pad. It's sheepskin on the bottom. We know that sheepskin is very therapeutic and it breathes really well. And then there are little pockets here. I'm going to have the little girl in back come up, if you could. Can you come up and help me? Because I can't hold my microphone and do this at the time. Open that for me and pull out what's in there. Does it look like this? It does, doesn't it? Go ahead and pull it out. This pad comes with a bushel of these, and they're fitted into the lining of the pad. And so I can fit most Western saddles, if they're close to the horse, by padding different places. What I use it most for is with a horse which the saddle rolls, and we can place the padding in here so that the saddle doesn't roll. It's also good for the flatter, withered horses that don't have anything to support them. We have 3 areas where we can really help a saddle that is okay for your horse, but you're having some movement with the saddle. Again, these aren't inexpensive, but they last a long time. I rode all last summer in one of my pads. I've washed it twice, and it kind of looks still new. So they're wonderful pads, and saddle fitting is really important. And I want to underline again, if you've purchased a horse with really good back conformation, you can put almost anything on that horse. You want a pad, But, and some of those old blankets, boy, they're terrific. They're just wonderful. The ropers love this. There's a shooter that bought one, and you can't get away from him. And he told me last summer, I don't think he'd mind if I told you, because he'd tell you. Ken Jones told me that he didn't ride it one time, and he could feel the difference, and his horse wasn't happy, because they move around a lot when they shoot. So he really loved his pad. Two other things I'm going to talk about really quickly, and then I'm done. Condition your horses properly. It's really, really important. I can guarantee you that there are long-term detriments to not conditioning properly in the spring. If you don't ride your horses in the winter, then start out slow. Slow and flat, and build up on the flat. Then start with some hills. I like to do hills that are short hills up and down, so that they can get used to it. The minute you see that they are tiring a little bit, quit. I think it takes at least 2 weeks to get a horse, really, really ready for that long, long ride. They need to get comfortable, and their muscles need to regenerate. Then you go to speed. And speed for you is probably a trot or a fast gait, and then you go up and down hills. And then you start pulling those big hills. Those big hills right out off the winter can really hurt the muscles of horses. And you may not figure that out right away. And they may still go for you. Horses are amazing. They'll do just almost anything if you've got that good temperament. But that's one thing that I see in the horse world, where people don't condition properly in the spring. The other thing is I like to see people warm their horses up, and warm them up at a walk and maybe a trot or a jog or something like that. Get those muscles going. It's really important for the system. Notice when something's wrong. I think 98% of the time, if a horse misbehaves, if it's a horse that's been a pretty good horse, they're in physical pain. So notice that, and they don't have to be in huge pain, but if they're just a little different, particularly if you're in the bob or something, you throw that blanket on and you're going out and it gets a little humpy, please get off and look under the saddle blanket. Or look and see if something's rubbing or not quite right, because I really believe that 98% of the time it's physical. I don't know how many times when I was traveling nationally where I heard, my mare is just being marish, or my horse doesn't like to have its ears touched. And with that, there was just so much tightness behind in the pole area, and when that was relieved, they were a different horse. So pay attention if they start switching their tail or laying their ears back, or they're misbehaving. Check for lumps and bumps and determine if they're good to go. And if they're not good to go, even though it's a big day, I really encourage you to let them rest. I missed some really amazing competitions because my horse wasn't ready to go. And for me, in the eventing world, that was expensive because I'd already paid the entry fees. But, and sometimes I determined exactly what it was. One time it was a good lesson because it was a vaccine that I'd done on Billy, 5 days before, and he just wasn't ready to go. So make sure your horse is ready to go. I don't want you to get hurt either. I think most horses warn you first and then unload you. And so pay attention to that. And I could be wrong, but I really, really think they do. And then the last thing I want to tell you, which is really important to me, is about emergencies. Be prepared for emergencies. And I probably need you folks to tell me how to do that in the backcountry. But have with you what you need. And I only put things down here for the horses, but take good care of yourselves too. And so I put some things down there that you really want. One thing that I don't have in my saddlebag that I probably should stick in my pocket if I'm riding by myself is a whistle. A good friend of mine came off at Heron Park last year behind, and we found her horse and we couldn't find her. It took us about half an hour to find her, and she was on her cell phone with her husband, and we couldn't find her. And she said, I wish I'd had a whistle. And because she had come off, you know, the road that kind of goes back to the Chase property there, she was coming back and her horse spooked and backed off that road. And they both went tumbling down, and he took off, he was fine, but she thought she'd broken her hip and couldn't move. Her cell phone, thank goodness, worked. And it was on her body. I put that down there too. It was on her body, not on her horse. And she called her husband, and they called us, and I caught the horse, and there were a bunch of people